Hi guys, I hope you had a great day on your field trip and you learned lots. And sorry I have to make a video, but we want to make sure you're caught up with where the rest of the class went today. So all of this stuff I'm going to go over pretty quick because it's stuff that we've already dealt with in the last chapter. So recall prior knowledge we talked a little bit about in class. We were just still doing number lines with positive numbers including whole numbers, fractions, and decimals. And if you remember, we worked a little bit on this in chapter 1. So it's just talking about whole numbers represented on a number line. So whole numbers are ones that you count with. There's no decimals or fractions in this one, but in this one, fractions represented on the number line starting at 0. They're going up by 1/8 intervals, starting with 1/8. And then if you add 1/8 again, it goes to 1/4, and they continue on up until 1. These ones, they did you do a little bit different. They're just trying to show you that you can use fractions on a number line so they don't all exactly go up that way. But decimals represented on a number line as well. We know you can go ahead and just go, there are 10 points that you want to go between 1 and 2, and then they're putting actual partial. So it's not 1.4 and a half. They did 1.4 and 4 or 1.45 in between the 1.5. So you can see a little bit there how they're working those. And each horizontal number line shown above can also be represented as a vertical number line. So here's the whole number line. Remember that when we're doing a vertical, the bottom part is going to be less than the top. So 0 starts down here and then we count up. Some of you guys were having problems on that on the last chapter, and the same thing with fractions and decimals. It's going to go higher, just like in our horizontal ones. All the ones to the left are lower and can go into the negative. All the ones to the right are higher or a bigger number, and the same thing with fractions and decimals. On vertical, all the ones that are going up are positive, all the ones going down are either lower numbers or negative numbers. So hopefully you caught on to that, and you guys should be following along in your book. Hopefully you have it. If not, just follow along real closely as I'm going through the book so you understand. So we actually did the we did not do the recall knowledge problems, which are these orange ones, but if you would like to just mentally do them in your head just to make sure you understand what we're talking about, you're welcome to. So odd numbers from 20 to 30, you would draw a number line from 20 to 30 and only put a dot on the odd numbers to put them on your number line. Then mixed numbers from 3 to 5. We did this on our test yesterday, so you should be pretty familiar. It means you make a number line from 3 to 5 and you go up intervals of 1 6, so 3 and 1 6, then 3 and 2 6, and then decimals, it says draw 8.0 to 10.0 would be what you put on your number line from start to finish, and then you go up intervals of 0.25, so it'd be 8.25, and then if you add 0.25 to that, it would be 8.50, and so on until you get to 10. So I think you guys are pretty familiar with that because we actually did it, and you guys did pretty well on your test yesterday. This we also did on our test, writing statements of inequality, which just means greater than or less than. And so some of you guys forgot to change a fraction or a decimal so that they're both the same. I think it's easier to take a decimal and turn it into a fraction because you can just put it all over the tenth, because the ninth is in the tenths place. So you would put the fraction just in the 10 divided into 10 because the ninth is in the tenths place. So you would put that right down here, and then it would be 9/10, and you could go ahead and make your denominators the same by multiplying 5 times 2, and then whatever I do to the bottom, I do the top, 4 times 2, and then at least your denominators would be the same, and you could see which one was greater than or less than. Or you could also, the other method was using the number line, and you could say, if I make a number line down here with my fractions and one up here with my decimals, I can kind of gauge which one is going to be less, because obviously the more to the left you go, the less it's going to be. more to the right you go, the greater the number will be. So look over that. If you still are like, I'm a little confused, go ahead and pause the video, watch it again, and you can go ahead and practice with these 3. Recall knowledge just in your head, but you don't have to do that. So what you want to do is make sure your denominators are the same if they're both fractions, so that you can do whatever I did to the bottom to make them the same. I have to times by the top as well. And then my decimals, this one we can say, look at the tenths place. Well, they're both the same, so we go up to the hundredths place, and this one has a 0 there, this one has a 4, so we know that this one would be greater. And down here, 0.72 and 7/12, we would have to change this into a decimal, and the last number we have is in the hundredths place, so we would put that over 100, and then you could make sure your decimals, or I'm sorry, your denominators are the same, and then you can look at those and see which one's bigger. So hopefully you understand that. If not, please watch the video and see if you can grasp that. If not, let me know and we can take some more time in class. Or after or before class. So now we're moving on to negative numbers and opposites. And we kind of talked a little bit about that when we did number lines. We're going to use negative numbers in this chapters to represent real world things. You can see down here temperatures. That's something you'll deal with in the real world. So you need to know how negative numbers relate to temperatures. So those are the real world kind of things we'll go over. So we're also going to compare and order positive and negative numbers on a number line. So right here, we talked about in class, positive and negative numbers can be used to represent many real-world situations, such in this example is temperature. They can be used to represent temperature readings above and below 0, as shown on the table. Notice that you use negative sign before negative numbers, so this little negative sign, I think you're familiar with that. You do not need to use a plus sign to show the positive numbers, and I think you guys are familiar with that too. So they can represent gains or losses. Losses would be obviously taking away something. Gains would be adding. For example, in a football game, negative 15 can be used to represent the loss of 15 yards on the football field. And 30 can be used to represent a gain of 30 yards. They can also represent values that are above and below a certain value, such as elevation, above or below sea level. For example, a depression that is 52 feet below sea level can represent negative 52 feet below the sea level. And a mountain peak would obviously be above sea level. Sea level is where the sea sits. When everything runs down, it goes where the sea is at, and that's called sea level. And that is, a mountain peak would be 7,310 feet above the sea level. So that would be positive. And right here it tells a little bit more about sea level. It's considered to be an elevation of 0 feet. That's right where the sea sits is 0 feet. So anything below, which would be the depression, so a big valley, or anything above, which would be a mountain, you can use negative and positive feet for. They can also be used to represent debits or credits. A debit is an amount someone owes, or a debt, you could also call it. A credit is an amount owed back to someone. So this debit or debt means someone owes you. That means you're waiting for that money, so it would be a positive number to you. A credit can be amount you owe to someone, so that's going to be something you take away from your amount of money that you have. So that would be a negative number. For example, negative 180 means a debt of 180. And 79 means a credit of 79. So they're using like a credit at the bank. If you get a credit, it means you put in that money. So that would be positive, which is the opposite of what the example I was talking about. And a debit means you used your debit card and took out 180. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then you are able to just, in your head, since we did these in class together, do these guided practice problems if you can. If you're still confused, maybe work through a couple of these. So 36 Fahrenheit below 0 would be a negative. If it's below 0, it'd be a negative 36. And a debit of 10 10,540 would be taking that out of your banking account. So that would be negative 10,540. And you can do these ones on your own if you're still confused. Also, New Orleans is 8 feet, and it says right here, New Orleans is 8 feet, and is that below or above sea level? Well, if it's negative, it would be below sea level. Mount Davidson is how many feet above sea level? We look up here, Mount Davidson is positive 928, so it's a mountain, it would be above sea level. The deepest location among the 4 locations is negative 282. That's the most negative number, Death Valley. And the highest location among the 4 locations is 2,421, Pilot Mountain, because that's the most positive number here. The location near the sea level, nearest to the sea level, would be the closest one to 0, which would be our negative 8, because it says level, and remember 0, we learned back on our last page, is sea level. So this is the closest to 0. So it would be New Orleans. So representing negative numbers on a number line, I think you guys know how to do that. We have a big poster in our room that says the more to the right you go, the more positive or greater the number. The more left you go, the less the number or the more negative the number gets. So make sure that you remember this. The more left is the higher or greater, or I'm sorry, the more right, and the more left is the negative number. Next page on a number line includes a number line that includes negative numbers, can be horizontal or vertical, and we already kind of talked about that in class. The ones to the right on a horizontal number line will be higher than 0, and the ones to the left will be lower. One thing I want you to point out here is on a number line, 3 and negative 3 are the same distance from 0. 1 is just going to be to the left, which would be the negative number, and 1 will be to the right. I'll move my little arrows here so you can see. And so those would be called opposite. 3 is the opposite of negative 3, and 0 is neither positive or negative. It's its own opposite. So continuing on to the next page, they just had you draw a vertical number line, and you don't need to do that. We just talked about it in class. And remember, when you go on a vertical number line, you go starting at 0 up, it's more positive or greater. When you go lower, it's negative. So you can see this is negative 25. If someone only took 25 apples away from me, that would mean I'm negative 25. But if they took 35 apples away, that means I'm negative even more apples. So it would be lower on the scale. So it just has a couple guided practice problems that help you with those. You're welcome to try to do if you're still confused. And then lastly, we talked about greater than, less than, when you're talking about number lines, and we talked about this at the first of chapter 1 as well. If I have negative 12, don't be fooled by thinking, well, because 12 is normally, if it's a positive number, bigger than 10, that negative 12 would be bigger than 10, because that's farther down, farther to the left on our number line. So that would mean 12 is actually less than 10. So you need to make sure you put that when you're doing greater numbers. So if you want to walk through a couple of those problems, if you're still confused on that, you may. But just remember, when you compare negative and positive numbers, be careful to think about the sign of the number. 5 is greater than 3 because 5 is farther to the right. Here's our 0. 5 would be farther to the right of 3. So it would be greater. But if we were doing negative 5, and positive 3, negative 5 would be way down here, whereas positive 3 would be here. And so negative 5 is farther to the left, so it would be less. So if you need help on those, you can do those guided practice problems together. So our homework assignment tonight, oh, and just real quick, we already talked about this, but a couple guided practice problems about negative feet or positive feet, depending on if it's above or below sea level, and they're saying which one would be greater. And the same thing applies on that, where it would be on the number line. Sorry, my glare is kind of working here. But you get, you can also write negative 509 feet. Well, negative 202 feet would be farther to the right of the number line, so it would actually be greater. So your practice tonight for homework is going to be practice 2.1, page 52 and 53, but you only need to go to number 34, and you're only going to do the even. That's all.